What is up, everybody? This is Adam. Welcome back to Fouled Out. Matt is going to be joining me in just a moment to catch up on the NBA playoffs. We have one conference finals down. The Celtics have swept the Pacers to advance to the NBA finals, and one conference finals to go. It is currently Wednesday, May 29th. So there's no game tonight, and the Mavericks are up 3-1 on the Wolves. They have a chance to put it away in Minnesota tomorrow. If not, we might be looking at a Saturday game for the NBA, which I think would help the NBA a lot. I was just telling my wife the other day that if both series end up being sweeps, it's kind of a bad spot for the NBA having a whole week off of basketball leading up to the final. And it's kind of like the Super Bowl bye week, but at the same time, that's revenue loss for the NBA. Their advertisers are complaining. So I kind of expected one of these series to not be a sweep, and it looks like the Mavericks and Wolves may end up even being 6 games. So the NBA may get a couple games out of that still. But before we get started, just a reminder, you can reach out to us, fouledoutsports@gmail.com. Really appreciate you guys listening to the podcast, and we would love to hear from you. I was just cleaning out the backlog of emails that we had, so hopefully I got back to everybody. If not, send us another note. I will get back to you. Got a couple emails calling me crazy last week for my take that Luka Doncic was going to be a bigger problem for the Wolves than Jokic was, and we all know how that's turned out so far. So I do like getting those emails. I like people telling me I told you so, and sometimes I like to get to say I told you so. So make sure you reach out to us. We'd really love to hear from you guys. But for now, let's get Matt and let's talk NBA playoffs. Let's go. All right, Matt is here. Matt, how you doing, buddy?
Uh, Better than the Pacers?
It's hard to be doing worse at this
Yeah.
point. Uh, Speaking of the Pacers, I'm kind of nervous to record today's podcast. I think sometimes on this podcast we go through incredible runs of getting everything right. Like, it'll be like the NFL playoffs, and we'll go 14-2 or whatever the number of games
Yeah.
is. Other times we'll have stretches on this podcast where we just jinx everything. And I feel like we're in the middle of a jinx stretch right now because we have what just happened to Denver in the last round of the playoffs. We were very confident Denver would pull that out. Uh,
Yep.
we talked up the Pacers a little bit on the podcast last week before the series with Boston started, or we were one game into the series and we were like, well, Boston's going to win, but I don't think the gap is that huge. And then Hallie gets hurt and the Pacers get swept.
Yeah.
And last week on the pod, I also talked to you about where we were at on Cat. And I was like, oh man, I really think he might crack the top 30 with the way that he's played in these playoffs.
Oof.
First 3 games against
Oof.
Dallas, absolutely brutal. But game 4 was last night. And actually, he had a really good game 4. Good bounce back game 4 for him. So it's like now I'm even more confused on where to put Cat in the top 30 because I was like, I'm going to vote him top 30. And then after the first 3 games, I'm like, no, I'm not voting for him at all. And after last night, I'm kind of like, I could see it again. So now I'm even more confused than I was. But I think it would make a ton of sense for us to jump on the podcast this week and start talking about the Mavericks and how impressive they've been, and just kind of start being like, oh yeah, man, I can't believe it's going to be Mavericks Celtics championship. But I don't want to put that evil on Luka Doncic because I feel like if we really talk up the Mavs on this pod, that Luke is going to get hurt and we're going to see the first team to ever blow a 3-0 lead. So that said, all I'm going to say is that the Celtics are the best team and they're definitely going to win the NBA championship. And that Rudy Gobert is awesome and he's going to continue to play awesome. Those are going to be the 2 takes I'm going to go with.
Yep. That tracks.
I know we're in a tough stretch right now, but
So I I saw someone post something that was comparing the players that the Celtics have avoided by injuries this postseason versus the players that the Pacers have avoided by injuries this postseason. And I don't think they realize how fucking stupid that makes them look. Because all the players that the Pacers avoided because of injuries are also players that the Celtics are avoiding because of injuries.
I made a starting lineup of all the players that the Celtics have avoided or guys who went down in series against the Celtics. And I was like, Dad, this team is going to win the championship if you made a team. It's
Yeah.
Halliburton, Donovan Mitchell. I put Ben Mathurin in there since he's been hurt and didn't play for the Pacers.
Yeah.
And then Jimmy Butler and Jared Allen. So, yeah, and that doesn't even count the fact that like Giannis was hurt. They didn't have to face Giannis in the East. Like,
Nope. I mean, Brunson got hurt twice. I mean, that's like a really big factor in why they didn't play Brunson.
yeah, the thing that's so funny about the Celtics to me. So, I was going to save our contractually obligated 10-minute segment about the East for last in this podcast, but we can go there now and make the sponsors happy because we do have to touch on both conferences. So the Celtics sweep the Pacers and they make the NBA Finals. They won the last two games in Indy by 3 points each without Halliburton playing either of those games. I have never met a more sensitive and butthurt fan base than this year's Celtics fans.
Yeah.
The narrative is already starting up in online circles that if the Celtics do win this championship, it basically doesn't count because they've avoided all these guys that we mentioned. And, you know, it's this narrative that it's like ever since the bubble, they've called it a Mickey Mouse ring. And they're like, oh, it's going to have an asterisk and blah, blah, blah. And I think that argument is really stupid. If you listen to the internet, the only two rings that have ever counted in NBA history are Dirk Nowitzki beating the Heat and the Pistons beating the Lakers in 2004. Those would be the only rings that they would count as legit rings. Everything else gets an asterisk next to it.
Wait, is that not how everyone looks at it?
I mean, depends how much time you spend online. It's funny because if you talk about stuff in like the internet basketball community and talk about stuff in real life with actual humans who have touched grass in the last 24 hours, you get very different responses. But
I mean, I'm okay with my team having the one of the two rings
yeah, that's fair.
that are real.
But it's funny because like everybody's already giving Celtics fans shit because they're like, oh, it doesn't count. Your team's not that good. Beat somebody real, blah, blah. And Celtics fans are just screaming back at them. We're 12-2 in the playoffs. We've only lost 2 games. And like they completely throw the context out the window. Context just doesn't matter anymore who you beat. So it's not Boston's fault they haven't played tougher competition. Right? Like,
nope.
All you can do is beat the teams that are in front of you. And it's like no team in the NBA is going to go out and be like, yeah, you know, the Cavs don't have Donovan Mitchell. We think that this ring's not going to look good if we win it. If we beat them, we'd really rather play somebody tougher. Like it's psychotic behavior. So you just beat the teams that are in front of you. That's all you can do. And like for Celtics fans, just calm down. Like, yes, you're 12-2 in these playoffs. You should be 12-2 in the playoffs with the level of competition you played. Being anything worse than 12-2,
they should be 12-0.
Yeah, I do think it's like super hard to sweep teams. And the one game they lost,
but
to the Cavs,
they've been in the perfect position to have swept every team.
Well, the one game they lost to the Cavs, Donovan Mitchell was playing in Boston.
That's fair.
So, and the Heat game was like a historical 3-point shooting performance by the Heat. But like, I don't worry about the 2 losses with the Celtics as much as I worry about like 3 or 4 of the wins they have, like I just mentioned the last
Well,
2 games in
I
Indy.
mean, several of the wins that they have because, well, I mean, we've been talking about the entire playoffs is when you are like overwhelmingly outmatching them from a talent standpoint, and you can't win by more than 5 points. Yeah, that's a huge red flag.
I keep teasing my dad because he's a huge Celtics fan. And I'm like, oh, wow, Celtics winning another game over a team who's missing their best player by 3 points. Like, very typical Boston win. But that's what I'm talking about is like, I'm not concerned that they lost 2 games, right? Like, you're going to lose games in the playoffs no matter who you're playing. It's the NBA. The guys that are left are not like total scrubs, but a lot of these games, you're right, like shouldn't be this close. You shouldn't be losing multiple games in a series. Like I think there are some more concerning signs for the Celtics that can't just be brushed away by Boston fans going, "We're 12-2." It's really hard to go 12
Yeah.
and 2. Like, yeah, you should be 12 and 2. My advice for Celtics fans would just be like, just acknowledge the context right now and just be like, yeah, like we've had a lot of good fortune with injuries, but instead they're like, oh well, we're missing Kristaps, so it's even. It's like in no world does that make it even. I know Kristaps is a good player, but he's your third best player, right? Like you're
He's your
not.
third best player, and also saying we're missing the player whose most iconic move in his time in the NBA is to not play is not a good argument.
Yeah, well, this is the thing is like just acknowledge the context and be like, yeah, the other teams were missing their best guys, but my counter argument, if I was a Celtics fan, I would just be like, the best ability is availability, and our guys are available, and theirs aren't. Like, I'll give Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown credit; they never miss games.
Yeah.
Neither of those guys has had a significant injury that I can remember in their entire time in the NBA. In the last like 8 years or however long it's been, I don't know how long anybody's been in any sport anymore. That I found out that Josh
Yeah.
Jacobs has only been in the NFL for 5 years today, and it broke my brain. So I have no idea how long it's been, but there's like this. We're on this 8 year odyssey with the Celtics. Those guys have never missed significant time, and they've played more playoff games in that time than anybody, I think, except for like the Warriors, and I think that's really close. So they got a lot of miles on them, and they
Hmm.
never miss games. And it's like, yeah, our guys are healthy, and it's going to help us win games because our guys can stay healthy when your guys can't. Like, I love Halliburton. He's an injury prone guy.
Yeah.
Donovan Mitchell, we've seen him miss time with injuries before. Jimmy Butler has been hurt
Yep.
before. Like, that would be my comeback because I just be like, yeah, like we're in a better position because our guys are healthier and our guys are able to stay healthy, and it's an important
Do,
thing this time of year
do you know why they stay healthy and Jimmy Butler doesn't?
because they don't have to carry the same load Jimmy does.
No, that's actually not what I was gonna say.
Jimmy's 37.
That too. But like Jimmy plays extremely physical basketball, and what do Tatum and Brown like to do on offense? ISO threes.
Yes, and I know that I've bitched about this for like years with them. I mean, what Boston's been doing has been working for them, right? Like they won 64 games this year. They're the one
Yeah,
seed in they
to
got the
yeah,
one
to
seed
a
in the East.
degree,
Like,
it has worked.
yeah. It also is easier when you have Derek White and Drew Holiday and Kristaps for 40 games and Al Horford and the like other good players
Yeah.
around you to help carry some of the load. But like it's hard not to say that what Boston is doing is working to a degree because it's been 8 years. They've been to a ton of conference finals. They're in their second NBA finals in 3 seasons. Yeah, three
Yeah, I
years.
think that
Second
sounds right.
second in 3 years. They've been in the Eastern Conference Finals a shitload of times. Like this team has had a lot of success. They just haven't had the success.
Hmm.
And it feels like it's kind of a no-win situation for Boston and their fans right now, because even if they do win the championship this year, they're in a position where everybody's going to be like, oh, yeah, but you didn't play anybody, so it doesn't really count. And it's just going to piss
Yeah.
Boston fans off forever because it's obviously getting under their skin already. Right.
Yep.
Like this would be my thing is like, don't let it affect you that people on the internet are making fun of your team because you're on this Mickey Mouse run, and just like acknowledge, like, yes, we're fortunate that we've had better injury luck, but a large part of that is because our guys are available all the time when other teams aren't. And then win the championship, and nobody can take that away from you. You get to hang the banner, you're the champs. But you got to win, because if you don't win, then everybody's going to come back here in 2 weeks and just be like, yeah, see, we told you, you guys fucking suck. You didn't play anybody. That was the problem. And then when you finally did play somebody, you got smacked. Just don't get smacked. Don't get win the championship, and then you'll be fine. But if you don't, it's going to be really tough for you.
Did you hear Brown call Miles Turner a kid?
No, I didn't.
Yeah. You know what makes that even funnier?
See, I'm going to guess that Miles Turner is probably older than Jaylen Brown.
He is older than Jaylen Brown.
Fantastic work by Jaylen. So yeah, the Celtics are there for the East. Congrats to the Celtics. Dallas is up 3-1 in the West, with the Timberwolves winning game 4 in Dallas last night to try to start clawing back in this series. I was watching that game last night, and I was just watching Rudy Gobert. And Rudy is so funny to me because I feel like we as a basketball public kind of forget how much we hate Rudy Gobert until he's back in like some big games. And then everybody just goes, oh, you know who I fucking hate? Rudy Gobert. And it's on like every podcast and every show. People are like, God, I just hate Rudy Gobert so much. So in honor of Rudy Gobert, I tried to come up with the top 5 NBA players that everybody hates. So I made a list for you to get your blind reaction, because I didn't tell you I was doing this. I didn't include people like LeBron James on this list because I feel like public opinion is kind of split, like 50-50 on LeBron James. Like there's a lot of people who love LeBron. There's a lot of people who
still
don't like
has
him.
his stands that, like, I mean, he could go full Isaiah Bugs, and those people would still be like, oh, I mean, those dogs had it coming.
Yeah. My list is people that we all hate. You know, it's not like people who are split. It's not like people that you and me hate, like Michael Porter Jr. Like if we were making a list of people that we hate on this podcast, I think Michael Porter Jr. just might be number 1. We'd just be like, I hate this guy.
Who likes Michael Porter Jr.?
I don't feel like people care that much about Michael Porter Jr.
Fair.
I think the top 2 on this list were very, very easy. And then I got to 3 and I was like, man, like it's kind of hard to find a third person where the overwhelming consensus is like, fuck this dude, I hate him. So there's like a tier list here. So number 1, the most hated player in the NBA is Rudy Gobert. I think overwhelmingly everybody hates him. The thing that's like really damning for him is not even just that like the public hates him. The fans of his own team don't like him. Nobody in the NBA, like there's no players in the NBA who are standing up for Rudy Gobert.
Nope.
Like you watch the press conferences after these games, they're like asking Ant questions. Ant's not like, yeah, Rudy's my guy. I got his back. Donovan Mitchell never stood up for Rudy Gobert. Donovan Mitchell actively did not pass Rudy Gobert the ball purposely. There was some crazy stat where like he only passed Rudy like the ball 8 times through like 50 games of a season. So the public hates Gobert. The players hate Gobert. The fans of their own team hate Gobert. I feel like the vastly over, like nobody is standing up for Rudy Gobert. He's easily number 1.
Yeah, it's bad when your greatest accomplishment in the NBA as a multi-time defensive player of the year is stopping the whole league in 2020.
He did shut down the whole. I mean, to be fair, the league was going to shut down anyway.
He made sure it happened real
He
quick.
just kind of sped it up. Um,
God.
any guesses at who number two is on my? There's like an elite tier of two guys. Where,
Draymond?
yeah,
Yeah.
yes. So number two is Draymond. The reason I have him below Gobert though is that I think there's still a lot of Warriors fans that will defend him, and Steve Kerr and Steph Curry, as much as I respect and love them, they're still like, yeah, Draymond's our guy. Right. Like Steph Curry will stick up for Draymond. Steve Kerr will be like, he's an idiot, but he's our idiot, basically. I feel like it's 90% people hate Draymond, but there is still like a cult following group that is like, Draymond's really important to the Warriors, okay? We really appreciate him. So this is when it started getting really hard because like who do you have anybody that comes to the top of your mind for who number three on this list would be?
Oof.
I'm pretty proud of what I came up with, but like this is where we start getting into it's not like
Yeah.
100% hate or 90-10 hate. Now we're going into like 70-30, 60-40 territory, I think.
Uh, I mean, maybe Harden, maybe Chris Paul.
Yeah. I have Harden in my honorable mentions.
Yeah.
Number three, I had Joel Embiid.
Yep.
I think, especially after this season, that this was a solid one. I think the majority of non 76ers fans hate Embiid.
Yeah, no, I just kind of forgot about him because we're past the second round.
That's fair. I don't think we've ever talked about Joel Embiid this late into the playoffs before. So, but I don't think you see like Embiid fans who are not 76ers fans.
Yeah.
Like LeBron has his stands who are not Lakers fans. They're just like, we're LeBron fans.
Yeah.
I don't think there are people out there that are just like, I don't really like the Sixers, but I'm a big Joel Embiid guy. So they're my favorite team right now because Embiid's on the team. The act is wearing thin. I think with everybody, the years and years of blaming everybody else and not accepting any responsibility, the dirty play all over the place. Like I talked to you before about how I think that this year's rendition of the U.S. men's national team is one of the most hateable U.S. men's teams we've ever had. And
Yeah.
a large part of that is because Joel Embiid has decided to play for the U.S. and not his home country.
Yeah.
It's like him and LeBron and Kawhi, and it's like okay. So like after Joel Embiid, I really started struggling because I don't feel like there's that many like stars or like high, um, not necessarily high caliber, but like high visibility players that
Yeah.
are like really hated. I feel like a lot of the stars, it's at least
I mean,
50-50. We kind of like most of them.
yeah, kind of getting into the like Dylan Brooks, Grayson Allen area.
So I have Dylan Brooks 5.
Okay.
And it's just like he's just not like famous enough.
You're not important enough.
Yeah, exactly. But like people don't like him. And people in Memphis were like, get this guy the fuck out of Memphis. Like we
They
hate
could
this
not
guy.
get rid of him fast enough.
Yeah, so I had him 5. Number 4, I had Miles Bridges from Charlotte.
Yeah.
Miles Bridges missed an entire year for violating the domestic abuse policy multiple times.
Yeah.
And I feel like if Miles Bridges was on the Lakers, everybody would hate Miles Bridges. They'd be like, oh, this guy, he got kicked out of the league for domestic abuse and now he's back. Because the thing about Miles Bridges is that he's good. Like he's good. He's just on Charlotte. So nobody cares about him. If he was on like a high visibility team and like playing in the playoffs a lot, I really feel like people would be like, this guy is disgusting and we hate him. So those are my top 5. Gobert, Draymond, Embiid, Miles Bridges, and Dylan Brooks. My honorable mentions, I had John Morant, who I still feel like Memphis fans are like ride or die for Ja. And I feel like a lot of the stuff with Jaws, it's like, God, he's just stupid. Like he's just an idiot and
Yeah.
he just keeps doing stupid stuff. I had Josh Giddey. I feel like Josh Giddey was just weird. Like the whole, we don't have to go into depth with what Josh Giddey did, but that was it was really weird and it was messed up.
Yeah, I mean, I've heard some people try to spin up stories of why like he might have been no, the fact if you are in that situation, you are not doing something right.
Yeah. And there's a lot of rumors with OKC having kind of an early flame out that he's going to be the guy to go this offseason and that the guys in the locker room don't really like him, especially after that incident. They're like, okay, Giddy's got a weird case. Why is he around? Kind of thing. Like, we need to move
Yep.
on from this guy. I put Paul George on the list. And it's like, the thing that's funny about Paul George is we're talking about all these people who have done stuff wrong. Paul George really has never done anything wrong. It just, nobody likes you. Like, I would be
Yeah.
shocked if Paul George has friends.
Well, it's yeah, he's just like one of those guys that like every time he opens his mouth, the wrong words come out.
I think Paul George is in this class of players, and I think Cat is in this class too. Because I talked up Cat a little bit last week, and I was like, he was really important in the Denver series. He's never done anything wrong. He's a good guy. He had that really sad story with his mom passing away with COVID, and like,
It was a lot more than his mom. He lost a ton of family
yeah, he
members
lost a
to
lot of
COVID.
family, didn't he? So
Yeah.
like he's gone through some hard times, but
Yeah.
also I was watching the Mavericks and the Wolves, and I'm just like, God, I just don't like him. I watch him and he's like beating on his chest and like doing all this. I'm like, I just don't like Cat. I just don't. I can't explain why. And it's like the same thing with Paul George. I'm like, I just don't like Paul George. I feel like the majority of people are like that. They're like, we don't hate Paul George. There's really no reason to hate Paul George because he's never done anything wrong and he's never like ended another team, right? Like nobody's out there like, oh, that it's not like Tom Brady or Michael Jordan where you're like, I just hate that guy because he's so good and he like crushed my team so many times. Paul George has never really done anything to anybody. But that's also kind of why like you don't like him. It's just like, don't like this guy. And then I had Michael Porter Jr. on my honorable mentions too, because I fucking hate Michael Porter Jr.
Fucking hate that
This
guy.
podcast is extreme. We're like 10,000% anti Michael Porter Jr. on this podcast. And I feel like other people are starting to come around to our way of thinking, but
He
I
is
feel
an
like
affront to basketball itself.
it was just funny because I feel like we were so close to breaking through with the general public. And then it was like, oh, well, Michael Porter Jr.'s had a lot going on at home recently, and that's probably why he's playing so bad. And I was like, no, we almost had it. We almost all acknowledged that Michael Porter
But
Jr. sucks.
what what was the excuse for every other year of his career?
We were so close to greatness. People were finally going to understand that Michael Porter Jr. is the worst asset in basketball because of how big his contract is and how much he sucks. And they let him off the hook. We had him. We let him off the hook. He is who we thought he was. So close to greatness. But going back to Gobert real quick, I feel like Gobert's best value to the Wolves is the fact that he can take all the heat off of Anthony Edwards and Cat when the team is playing badly. Because it's not Gobert's fault they're down 3-1. It's Anthony Edwards and Cat's fault that they're down 3-1. Like, I like Ant, but my guy is out here shooting tour dates for the last like 2 weeks. This is game log for his last 7 games. 5 for 15, 8 for 17, 6 for 24, 6 for 16, 5 for 17, 11 for 24, and 11 for 25. Even though they won game 4, and if you look at the box score, he almost had a triple-double. Still shot 11 of 25. Coincidentally, 11-24 and 11-25. Awful tour dates. Bad games, even worse tour dates. They're too close to Thanksgiving. But nobody cares and nobody's blaming Anthony Edwards because they're just like, yeah, but did you see Luka cook Gobert for that game winner in game 2? In a switch that wasn't Gobert's fault and that he never should have been in. And I will never, ever understand why the Wolves didn't throw a double at Luka there to get him to give up the ball. But they're just like, fuck. This is how I know everybody hates Rudy Gobert is because they're just like, yeah, fuck this guy. Leave him on an island. They're like, at least if we lose, that Gobert is going to get embarrassed.
Yeah, no, like they literally chose to do the thing that put Gobert in the position that has gotten him played off the court every single offseason or postseason.
And they've done a good job of avoiding that so far this postseason.
Yeah, for the most part, they really have.
But that's kind of what the Mavericks specialty is like dragging out. They really drag out the guys that you don't want them to drag out to the 3-point line. And then Kyrie and Luka just fucking abuse them for 2 hours. This is what the Mavericks have done so well is they're just like, oh, okay, Gobert, get out here. It's your turn. And he's like, oh, come on, man. I don't want to do this shit. But that's really Gobert's value to the Wolves is like Anthony Edwards can play as poorly as he wants this entire playoffs. And people are just going to be like, Gobert. Hate that guy. And nobody's going to blame him.
You get for trading for a Frenchman.
Oof. I think it's safe to say that everybody jumped the gun on Anthony Edwards as well. Putting him into this like super elite tier of players and being like, dude, this guy is the next Michael Jordan. I think I'm still going to vote for him to be top 10 when we do the top 30 here in a couple weeks. But
yeah,
I just went over the shooting numbers. They've not been good now for the last 3 games versus Denver and then the first 4 games of this series. And he's looked lost at times in this series. Like the thing that made me crack up in game 4, near the end of the game, Anthony Edwards gets the ball at the 3-point line, pump fakes, drives in, and then goes up to take a shot. And while he's just about to shoot it, he decides to chuck it all the way across the court and throws it basically out of bounds. Like Jaden McDaniels catches it, but lands out of bounds. And Reggie Miller's just like, no. Reggie Miller's yelling at Anthony Edwards on the broadcast. Like I would yell at my dog if he's like eating my son's food. It's like, no, stop that. What's wrong with you, Anthony Edwards? Get off the table.
Yeah, no, like that's like one of the first things they teach you is like, don't like do the like, oh shit, I don't want to shoot this pass.
Anthony Edwards has this like really special jump shot to me where he's able to elevate. He's so athletic and he elevates so high that it's like unblockable.
Yep.
And he's good at this like 15-footer. Just take it. That's what Reggie Miller was saying. Reggie Miller's like, why are you not taking that? You pump fake the first guy and you got a wide open 2 and you're passing it up to chuck a bad pass across the court.
Yeah, well, and that's the thing. You pass up a shot to make the worst play in basketball.
Yeah, it's like a quarterback who's like scrambling out of the pocket and like has a chance to gain a couple of yards and then decides to throw across his body all the way across the field. It's just like, just make the safe play. Just, live to fight another day. But he's 22, right? And he's learning. Like, what were you doing when you were 22?
Drinking.
I definitely was not playing in a super fucking high level basketball game against the best players in the world. Right? Like, there's a lot of pressure for a 22-year-old. So
that was my side job.
Yeah, I was doing that in my spare time. But it's just funny to me, like how people want to jump the gun on everything, especially like when it's new or newer. I made the case last week for Luka to become the consensus best player in the world this summer. And my case was like, okay, if he beats the Wolves and then he beats the Celtics and wins finals MVP, even then he's not the best player in the world. I was like, he's got to go get Slovenia qualified for the Olympics and like have an Olympic run and beat some guys. And I was like, that would really make me start thinking about putting him over Jokic. All of that. And then I'm listening to podcasts this week while the Mavs are up 3-0 and people are like, you know who the best player in the world is? Luka. They're like, God, Luka's just the best player, and we've never seen anybody this good. He's amazing. And I was like, I really overestimated people's patience and like willingness to just throw him in the best player in the world conversation. And maybe I'm a little bit too conservative on Luka because I am a Luka stan. I love Luka. I've loved Luka ever since he came in the league, and I don't want to overdo it. But I was like, you got to accomplish all of this, and then I'll talk about putting you number one. And other people are just like, I watched him hit one shot over Rudy Gobert. This is the best fucking player I've ever seen. I'm like, okay, guys. This is why we do our top 30 rankings after the season is over.
Yeah.
Right? Because like, so what happens if the Wolves do come back and win this series? Where is Luka? Are you still saying Luka is the best player in the league? I highly doubt that. And it's like for Cat, I was just talking about Cat earlier and saying, if we would have voted for top 30 last week, I'd have him in my top 30. Mm-hmm. If we voted after game 3, I would not have him in my top 30.
Yeah.
If we voted right now, I don't know. But this is why we do it after the season. We have an opportunity to see more and get the whole story before we start going on podcast and being like, Luka's number one, hands down, so good.
No, and I mean that was my whole thing when we're talking about Ant potentially having like a path to being number one, by the start of next season, right? And like, no, he hasn't laid the foundation, and we're seeing now, why he's not quite there yet. Again, 22, well on his way to being able to do that, but not there yet.
I just realized this. I think today I was watching this video of like who are the top 4 NBA players at every age right now. And they did like 19 through 25 or whatever. Do you know who else is 22? Cade Cunningham is 22.
Yeah.
I feel like if Cade Cunningham was doing what Anthony Edwards is doing right now, we would just be sitting on this podcast and being like, Cade Cunningham, he's a top 5 player. He's the best player in the world. So I totally get why Wolves fans are like, holy crap.
Yeah, for sure. To be fair, Cade Cunningham would be doing a lot more if he had help.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not saying Cade Cunningham is as good as Anthony Edwards, but I will say that I think my thing about
I'm
Anthony...
not saying he's not.
Podcast. I will say, like, Anthony Edwards is in a really good position to make a run. Like, I will give him all the credit in the world. He took the jump this year.
Yep.
Right. Like we talked about it, like all of the Wolves team building stuff. When your best guy, your 22-year-old, just all of a sudden becomes like prime Dwayne Wade, that really helps with all the team building stuff. But also it's a really good team around him for the most part. I mean, I know they haven't looked like it during parts of this series, but like, Jaden McDaniels is a dude who's going to become like a $30 or $40 million a year guy.
Yep.
Eventually, that like kind of the perfect 3-and-D guy. And then you kind of have this like front court in this team that was built to beat Denver. And it's a good overall team. So like if you put Cade on a team where there was anybody else on the team that was good, maybe we would see how good Cade really is as well. It's almost like roster construction is important. But I was thinking about the Mavericks roster construction. And, 2 years ago, they were in the Western Conference Finals against the Warriors. And they had like Dorian Finney-Smith and like all these wings. And I think they had Jalen Brunson at the time. And we took a look at their cap space on this podcast after they lost that series. And we were just like, man, this team is super screwed. They have no room to make improvements. We don't know if they can make it back here, blah, blah, blah. And they go ahead and take the huge risk by trading for Kyrie. And that trade is like absolutely panned and annihilated at the time. Right. But like, I think it's easier to say now that Kyrie's had a really good series and like multiple 30-point games and wins and has kept his head on straight. But I think like going back and looking at that kind of shows you why teams take risks like that, because there's like a finite amount of guys in this league who can do what Kyrie is able to do when he's playing at his best in the playoffs. Right.
Yeah.
Like one of the things that's been the big difference maker for the Mavericks in the series against the Wolves has been when they need a bucket and they need a guy to create a bucket for themselves, they have two guys who can do it at a super high level. And there's
Mhm.
just not that many dudes like that in the league.
They just so happen to be going against a team that really wants to play with two bigs. And I just think that is asking for a disaster against these two guys. Granted, as we said, Minnesota has generally done a decent job of trying to avoid that, but it's not quite been enough because those guys have been able to pretty much control the series.
Yeah, I just think it goes to show like why teams will always take the risk on these high level guys.
Hmm.
Right. Like we've talked a lot of trash about Paul George on this podcast, but we've still seen him have some like high level moments with the Clippers in the playoffs. Like he took that team to the Western Conference Finals without Kawhi Leonard a couple of years ago. So, I mean, a random team like the Pistons might look at that and be like, wow, we should give that guy a max contract. But like, I think, someone will take the risk on Paul George, whether it's the Clippers re-signing him to a massive deal or someone else giving him a max. Philly in the last week has been linked to like every single good wing player that there is. Like they're talking about LeBron. They're talking about like, I saw a story today that was like Philly willing to give Jimmy Butler the max. And I'm like, okay, first of all, Jimmy Butler is not a free agent. You're going to have to trade for him. But that's like why, even as these guys start getting older, that other teams are like, hey, let's try to acquire these guys. Let's pay them whatever kind of money it takes because we get to this part of the season where it's nut crunching time. And there's only so many guys who can really do this at a high level. Like you're not seeing other players in this series have huge games. It's
No.
Luca, it's Kyrie, it's Ant, it's Cat to a degree. And so far, every single game has been decided by which one of those combos scores the most points. Right? Like when Luca and Kyrie have been cooking, that's been the answer for the Mavericks. Luca had a tough one last night. He was 7 of 21. Kyrie didn't have a good game either. I think he was 6 of 18. And they're entitled to have a not so great night after how the two of them have been playing. But Cat and Ant outscore him last night. Cat has a really nice game, 25 and I think 25 and 10 on 9 of 13 shooting. And that's the difference in the game.
25 and 5.
Oh, I thought he had 10 rebounds, but still 25
Go
points, 20.
Gobert had 10.
Oh, still 25 points on 9 of 13 shooting though that's a nice offensive night from Cat.
Banging in those threes was kind of the difference in that game, especially when you look at like their foul situation too. Cat fouled out both Gobert and Edwards had 5 fouls by the
Yeah,
end of the game. Like they were like moments away from disaster.
there was a point pretty early in that game where it was like, okay, Cat has 4, Gobert and Ant both have 3. What's about to happen here?
Yep.
You know? And like it's funny because Luca didn't even play that good, but I think had like a 29, 15, and 10 or something like that.
Hmm.
So I still think the most likely scenario for this series is that it does go 6 and kind of, I think the Wolves get one more at home and then Dallas ends it in 6 games. Um, Absolutely nobody has been afraid to walk into Minnesota and take games from them, though. Like The Nuggets took multiple games in Minnesota. Dallas has already won 2 in Minnesota, so it easily could end game 5. But I don't I don't know that we see the first ever 3-0 comeback here. And my only regret on picking the series is that I didn't go harder on Dallas last week. I think, I made the whole case for why Dallas is going to be a worse matchup for these guys than Denver. And Dallas has got this and this. And I laid out this whole thing, but then we didn't make picks on the pod. And I really wanted to throw out there last week. I just wanted to be like, yeah, I think Dallas is going to win. But I kept replaying that game 7 in Denver in my head. And I psyched myself out. Matt still got all the question marks as the virtual background this week because I'm still baffled by that game, and even more baffled after watching the first 4 games of this series.
It feels like the appropriate background for the NBA playoffs at this point.
Yeah.
Like, there's no point in changing it.
Yep. Probably going to end up with a Dallas versus Boston finals, just like we all predicted.
I look at this series, and I know you said you're kind of expecting it to go 6. I look at Luka seeing that he had an opportunity for a sweep, and I don't think he's going to be very happy that he missed that opportunity. I think game 5, it gets put away.
Kyrie Irving was 14-0 in closeout games before yesterday.
Jesus.
In his career, he had never lost a closeout game. And then that was his first one. So,
well, he clearly never played for Doc Rivers.
Yeah. Oh, Doc. Speaking of coaches, the Clippers just gave Ty Lue a 5-year, $70 million extension.
I saw that.
Ty Lue is another guy I'm just never going to understand. People are like, you don't understand. He's a genius. I'm like, in what way? People are like, you just don't understand. He's a genius. And I'm like, no, I don't understand. If he's a genius, I don't understand that. And I need someone to explain it to me. And I don't know, like, the Clippers thing, not to harp on the Clippers too much, but like Paul George is going to have offers this offseason, right? Yep. He might leave. You got to make a decision on James Harden. You got a brand new stadium that you're going to open next year.
Yep.
And it's like, I feel like they want to do all the window dressing things of being like, okay, we're going to lock in. We're going to have like Russell Westbrook and James Harden and Paul George and Kawhi Leonard. And we're going to have Ty Lue, like a name, as our coach. And we're going to go open this stadium next year and have some excitement around this team. And it's there's no reason to be excited about this team. Can I also just say, like, I kind of brought up the Team USA roster earlier. I do not understand why some of these guys are playing Olympic basketball this summer. Kawhi Leonard hasn't played a playoff, like more than 2 playoff games in like 3 years.
Yeah.
Joel Embiid gets hurt every year.
Yep.
Halliburton just like hurt his hamstring in the Eastern Conference Finals. Why are you guys now being like, what we should do is play more basketball? I need like 20 days off during the season, but I'm going to fly to Paris and play on the Olympic team this summer. I worry about the Olympic team. I do. I'm worried we're not going to win because we didn't bring enough point guards. They had 1 spot left and they were down to Jalen Brunson and Kawhi Leonard. And I was like, you obviously need to take Jalen Brunson. And they're like, no, we're going to take Kawhi Leonard. I'm like, okay.
Yeah, so that's dumb. And I mean, I don't worry about the Olympic team mainly because I just don't care enough. This is these guys' second job, essentially. Like, I don't care how they do in their second job. I just don't.
I know.
And honestly, I think with the point that you made, the thing to worry about with these guys isn't how they do in the summer. And like, it's next year.
Yeah, I think Olympic basketball, I love Olympic basketball. and FIBA. I love all the international basketball because whenever these guys get together and play on teams like this for extended periods of time, this is the behind the scenes, like where the future super teams of tomorrow are built. And the fact that these guys want to like pair up with each other, like this is where LeBron James, Dwayne Wade, and Chris Bosh decided they were going to play together in
Yeah.
Miami, stuff like that. So I like seeing things like that. You can also, I think Olympic basketball and FIBA basketball can be super important to player development of being around like all these stars and stuff. Anthony Edwards is like the perfect example of this. He went and played FIBA and he was the best, most important player on the FIBA team this summer. And even though they came in fourth, he comes back and he makes this massive leap this season. So like I think this stuff is important for a lot of reasons, not just like, oh, it's America, we got to go win the gold. But also if you fuckers don't bring home the gold, this is going to be embarrassing. It's going to be embarrassing for you guys. I also think it's interesting they brought Steph Curry. I think this is going to be Curry's first international basketball experience.
Huh.
Yeah.
Yeah, that is interesting.
Isn't that weird? I was looking it up. I don't think that it says that he was considered in 2012, but he didn't go with that team. So it's his first Olympic experience. And I actually like when you watch the US men's national team, sometimes in these competitions, it's like, God, they could really use like a really good shooter to kind of put them over the top in some of these games. And it's like, dude, Steph's going to have some games in the Olympics that are going to be ridiculous with the FIBA rules and stuff like that. That's going to help them a lot. And I think it's going to be fun to watch him in his first experience.
Yeah, it's strange that he was only considered in 2012.
I think the invite was probably open for him for the last 12 years.
Yeah,
I
but
would
he
imagine, and it was never the right time for him to take it with how dominant the Warriors were and stuff. But
because that was right before he truly exploded onto the scene.
Yeah. I think the other thing that's really interesting is Rich Paul kind of let slip that LeBron is going to be declining his player option and he'll be a free agent this summer. And all the offseason stuff is kind of before the Olympics, but like, is there a chance that LeBron drags this out a bit and then goes to Paris and plays with all of these stars and kind of is like, oh, I really like playing with Steph Curry. Maybe I should play more with Steph Curry, or like, Devin Booker and Kevin Durant are on this team and Phoenix has been a rumored location that LeBron could land. It's like, oh, could he end up there? Could he end up like, I think that's another interesting thing to watch with these guys is like, okay, do Anthony Edwards and Tyrese Halliburton kind of look at each other and they're like, both made the conference finals this year. Maybe in a couple of years when we got an opportunity, one of us pushes to go play with the other one, or we meet up and we play somewhere like LA or Miami or something. Plants the seeds.
The hardest road.
Yeah. But that is it for us. As always, Fouled Out can be found on Spotify, Apple Podcast, Pocket Cast, Overcast, anywhere you get your podcast. You can hit us up on Gmail, fouledoutsports@gmail.com. You can find our videos on TikTok, Fouled Out Sports Podcast. It is a long name, but you can't miss it. Game 5 of the Mavericks and Timberwolves is going to be the night that this podcast drops, May 30th. If there were to be a game 6, it would be Saturday. Game 7 would potentially be Monday. When we come back next week, we'll be back on the 6th next week. This podcast will be dropping the first day of the NBA Finals next week. We're going to come back. We're going to do the NBA Finals preview. We're going to break down the Celtics versus probably the Mavericks, maybe the Celtics versus the Wolves if we see something crazy, but we'll be breaking that matchup down and making picks next week and talking about all the angles of the NBA Finals. Matt, you got any final thoughts before we sign off?
Fuck Isaiah Bugs.
I agree with that.
It is morally acceptable to harass him on social media at this point. Yeah. So
we're actively encouraging you to dox this man.
Seriously, fuck that guy.
My final thought is that the I don't know if you've been keeping track of this as much, but they're moving the Arizona Coyotes hockey team to Utah, at least temporarily, maybe permanently. And they're trying to come up with a new name for the Utah hockey team. And I'm just like, I feel like branding a sports team in the 2000s has just been the single most difficult thing to do. Honestly, I think of all the expansion teams since 2000, and it's like the Houston Texans, rough name, the New Orleans Pelicans, the Vegas Golden Knights, the I kind of like Seattle Kraken. That was
Yeah.
I did not expect that. Um Utah is down. They're saying they're down to four names, and the two that they mentioned that are front runners are the Utah Mammoth and the Utah Yeti. I don't know, man. I guess Yeti's not like Yeti's fine. It just doesn't feel like a
Yeti's
professional.
fine, and honestly, it would probably be a pretty lucrative one for them.
Yeah, it just a lot of these teams feel like like when you would create a team back in like the old NBA games or like the old NFL games where you could make your own team and they had preset logos that you could pick from.
Yep.
These just all feel like preset
Yep.
logos.
That is exactly what it is.
Like even the Kraken, I like the Kraken, but it feels like that's like a badass preset logo that people would pick and be like, oh man,
Yeah,
like that one's cool.
yeah, no, like I feel like it was the right choice for to like choose that as like the team name and all that. But then when we actually saw like what the artwork was gonna look like, it was like, oh, well, that's underwhelming.
It just doesn't feel like a real hockey team. Same thing with the Vegas Golden Knights. Is
Yeah.
that's a little bit better, but it doesn't like when I watch like the Boston Bruins versus the Detroit Red Wings or the Toronto Maple Leafs, I'm like, this is hockey, like the Rangers, the Black, and I know I'm naming original six teams, but it feels like hockey. And I'm like, oh, it's the Boston Bruins versus the Seattle Kraken. And I'm like, what AHL team is that got called up to play against the Bruins? It doesn't sound like a real professional sports team. And I think that
Well,
that's the problem of these new names.
it's almost like it doesn't matter what the choice is because it's new, it's not gonna sound real. You grew up having so many, like, yeah, like these are like the teams. And then something new is introduced, and it's like, okay, well, that seems weird.
Yeah, I guess the one thing and I know you can't do this in Utah because there's never been a hockey team there before, but when they moved the Atlanta Thrashers to Winnipeg, they revived the old Winnipeg Jets name.
Yeah, yeah,
And that's like a new team, but it feels like it's a real hockey team, right? You're just like, oh
yeah,
yeah, Winnipeg Jets, that makes sense.
yeah.
It, I don't know. The Utah Yeti sounds like it's like a eighth grader that came up with that name. They're like, yeah, we're gonna name it the Yeti. Like, okay, it's fine. It's just I don't know. And I hate these like they did the same thing the Commanders did, where they're like, we're down to 20 names, and then they put out the 20 names, and everybody's like, I like that one, I like that one, and they're like, now we're down to four, and they left off like some of the best names. Like it's like, god damn it, the Commanders are the worst offenders of this because they're like, we're down to four names, and it's the Commanders and the Washington Football Club. And it's like, what happened to like the Red Hawks and the Red Wolves and like the all these cool names you could have picked from? And they're like, we might go with the Pigs. Look at General Tutty over here. I'm like, okay,
Yeah, no, like it feels like when teams do this, they actively exclude the ones that like the fan base at large is like, that would be awesome. Like,
well,
yes, that one. And then they're like, all right, well, thank you for being part of our process of elimination.
I think we're all just upset that Seattle didn't go with the Rain City bitch pigeons still. But yeah, it's hard in 2024 not to feel like these are all very generic. Like Cleveland Guardians is like the most generic thing
Yeah.
that the Cleveland baseball team could have changed their name to. But anyway, that final thought was a little bit long, but that's been on my mind because I was like, it's just so hard to brand nowadays, I guess. If you don't have like the cachet from being a historical brand, it's hard to break into the market. But I don't know about Utah Yeti. I guess we'll see. But
Yeah, I think time is the necessary ingredient there.
I don't know if I it's been like 22 years since the Houston Texans came into existence, and I still think it's a stupid name. Never, never gonna
No,
get
you
over it.
you need a good like 60 years for it to feel right.
It's like the old South Park joke of like when can we joke about something? They're like, it's been 23.7
What
years. We could joke about it.
is it our 9/11 jokes finally funny?
Yeah, exactly. The Houston Texans version. But all right, my friend, I will see you soon.
Yep,
Bye,
I
guys.
guess.
Bye,
Bye,
Mark.
Robin.